Welcome to this special edition episode of our podcast at CHSG History. Today we're going to do this podcast in memory of the Holocaust as we near the 80th Memorial Day internationally.
We will be looking at events in the Holocaust as well as remembering other genocides that have happened in our modern world.
We'd like to hand over to the overview first.
Hello and welcome to our CHSG History Podcast episode for Holocaust Memorial Day. This snippet will include an overview on the oppression faced by Jews and others under Adolf Hitler.
The Holocaust was a genocide by the Nazis of the Jewish people. For those unsure, can you tell us what the word genocide means?
The legal term genocide refers to certain acts committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial or religious group. In the case of the Holocaust, the targeted groups included, but were not limited to, the Jews, Roma and Sinti people, homosexuals, black people, Jehovah's Witnesses and political opponents. But why were these groups targeted?
The Nazi dictator Adolf Hitler envisioned a German empire of conforming, productive Aryans, a white individual of Northern European descent. Anyone who did not fit this image was persecuted.
Persecuted? How?
Most people have probably heard about the concentration and eventually death camps, where the Nazis imprisoned their victims and put them to work until they proceeded to murder them.
Other forms of oppression included eugenics, controlling reproduction, sterilization, especially of homosexuals and disabled people, and terror through the Nazi police state, which included the Gestapo and the SS.
These organisations spied on the population to arrest anyone who did not conform in the eyes of the regime, often imprisoning them, executing them, or sending them to concentration camps without trial.
In total, the Nazis murdered around 11 million people, 6 million Jews, 5 million non-Jews. It is important to commemorate the victims of this brutal genocide and combat discrimination and genocide in all parts of the world.
This is why it is vital that Holocaust Memorial Day is not forgotten, to remind people worldwide about the terror of one of the most horrific events in history.
Welcome to this segment of our special episode of the CHSG History Podcast, done in memorial of the Holocaust as we near the 80th Memorial Day. Today we will speak about our experiences visiting the Auschwitz camp with the Lessons from Auschwitz project. I am Eliza and I am joined today by Charlotte, Amber and Connie.
Thank you for introducing us, Eliza. The Lessons from Auschwitz project offers a one-day trip to Poland to visit the sites of the Auschwitz camps and 2 online seminars where they speak about different individuals and have a survivor recount their life for you. It is therefore a very immersive experience where we learn a lot and gained a different perspective of the situation that you don't get from a classroom environment.
That's correct. The main aim of the project is to allow post-16 students to separate the event and the people who lived through it from the statistics and numbers. The workers who led us through this experience had special training for both the enormity of trying to reteach this and the emotional turmoil for the students who visited.
We saw the whole of Auschwitz on this trip, including the chemical plant where the most healthy prisoners were put to work to make more money for the Nazi regime.
The plant is still active today and people who live in Auschwitz work there now, so we were not allowed on this site. After this, we went on to see Auschwitz I. What stood out for you there, Eliza?
Auschwitz I was the smaller of the 2 camps, as we were told, but the size still astonished me when we first arrived. It was like a maze with so many different identical buildings, some repurposed from army barracks and some built by the Nazis.
I found it very difficult to walk through those halls, especially when we got to the hospital, as it wasn't a place for the healing, but rather a place to put the dying. Amber, what about your experience?
I agree with you. Auschwitz I was deceptively described in the textbooks as a better of the 2 camps, creating the idea that it was less cruel, but it was still a death camp and home to a large underground gas chamber that we got to enter, which really opens our eyes to what someone may have actually experienced in the room, instead of thinking about them as a statistic.
I would like to add that we were taken around not only by the project leaders, but also a rabbi from London, so we were given the opportunity to learn about Judaism along the trip. This meant that we were introduced to their religion and its values in terms of the camp. This included learning about those who would practice in secret or even sneak in matches to burn candles. They would use the sun and moon to time when religious events would occur so they could practice their faith.
This was very crucial when we went around Auschwitz-Birkenau, as the memorial is located at the end of the tracks. This is a place to remember, built right by the ruins of two of the gas chambers held at the camp. There is 1 stone placed there for each life taken in that camp.
We took part in a memorial at the end of the day where poems were read and we got to light a candle. This was done as it got quite late, so it was dark and very cold in early November and late February, creating a sombre atmosphere after going around both camps.
I felt myself that the atmosphere was quiet and respectful the whole time, but it got more sombre when we saw the train tracks and the train carriage along with it. It is one of the only aspects of the camps that have been photographed clearly more than a few times, making it more difficult for me as we had photos of people going through the process of being sorted and selected to be put in the chamber. The visuals just made it so much harder, don't you think, Connie?
They did. We were following in the footsteps of the camp inmates from decades ago as they were persecuted for their faith. It was an out-of-body experience when you thought too hard about certain aspects.
Yeah, Connie, it was such a long walk and the same gravelly, sandy road from 80 years ago. It felt so odd to be walking that path.
The memorial I mentioned earlier also included a song sung in Hebrew by the rabbi who accompanied us all day, which was a very impactful way to end the day. We were remembering through preserving their faith and recognising the prisoners as real people, not just a mass of unidentified faces, some down to the number of 6.2 million.
We also had a seminar to wrap it up a week after the trip, which allowed for more reflection, which is always important when looking into an event with destruction on the scale like this.
Absolutely. We got to go over what we had learnt and process our own emotions, which is really crucial. But we also got to listen to a survivor's story, which was very influential on how we viewed the Holocaust.
The story included a vital message to take away from the whole experience. Once you've witnessed a survivor story, it becomes your job to pass it on, to never forget the past and to continue to remember the victims.
This is why doing things like our podcast are so important when it comes to Memorial Day, and why remembering has a proper use in today's day and age. We have to preserve the memory so it will never happen again.
To truly understand the impact of the Holocaust, it's important to look at survivor stories. We'll be looking at Eva Clark.
Eva Clark was born in Mauthausen concentration camp, a Nazi Germany camp located in Upper Austria. Her and her mother were the only surviving members of her family, many of which were killed in Auschwitz-Birkenau.
Her story begins with her father, Bernd Nathan, an architect who fled Germany for Prague in 1933 when Hitler rose to power. In Prague, Bernd designed film sets and met Anka, his soon-to-be wife. The couple married in 1940 in a Nazi-occupied area.
In December 1941, Anka received a card notifying her that she would be sent to Terezin, a transit camp. With the note suggesting that it would not lead to anything bad, Anka was advised to pack a suitcase with pots and pans and even brought donuts for her husband, unaware when they would eat again. She endured 3 days in a warehouse before being transported to Terezin, where she worked, delaying her deportation to Auschwitz.
In 1943, Anka became pregnant with a son, despite the camps being segregated by sex. When the Nazis discovered her pregnancy, Anka and Bernd were forced to sign a document stating the baby would be handed over to the Gestapo, the secret police force, at birth.
However, the baby died of pneumonia at 2 months old, which inadvertently saved the life of both Anka and Eva.
In October 1944, Anka volunteered to follow her husband to Auschwitz, unaware of where she would be going. Anka arrived in Auschwitz pregnant, yet survived the selection process, a process which only 20% of people made it through, as her pregnancy was not yet visible. This was the last time she saw her husband, later finding out that he was shot on the 18th of January 1945, just a few days before Auschwitz was liberated by the Red Army. Bernd never knew Eva existed.
At Auschwitz, conditions were appalling. Prisoners only received a cup of coffee in the morning, soup in the evening, and if lucky, a piece of bread. Most people arriving at Auschwitz were immediately sent to the gas chambers, and those spared were sent to forced labour. Even if they survived initially, many prisoners starved or were killed because of the work they were doing.
Prisoners would often spend hours at roll calls, and Anka often fainted during these. Luckily, her friends held her up so she never drew attention to herself.
After spending only 10 days at Auschwitz, Anka was sent to work in the armament factories near Dresden. During this time, she became weaker and weaker and began appearing more pregnant, but it was too late for her to be sent back to Auschwitz to be killed.
By the spring of 1945, the Nazis were beginning to evacuate concentration camps and retreat as the Red Army began to approach. Anka and 2,000 other prisoners were forced onto coal wagons and endured a 17-day journey through the Czech countryside to Mauthausen concentration camp. Without food or enough water, Anka weighed only 35 kilograms despite being 9 months pregnant. She was described to resemble a pregnant skeleton.
Upon seeing the name of Mauthausen, a notorious camp, Anka entered early labour and Eva was born on the cart with no medical assistance. Typically, newborn babies and their mothers were killed shortly after birth, but Anka and Eva survived.
On the 28th of April 1945, the Nazis ran out of gas, and Mauthausen gas chambers had been blown up.
Eva was born on the 29th of April 1945, surviving by only a day.
The next day, Hitler took his own life, and on the 5th of May, the Americans liberated the camp. At the point of liberation, even eating too quickly would have killed the remaining people.
After liberation, Eva and Anka were placed on a train back to Prague, soon learning that no one would be waiting for them once they got off the train. 15 of her family members were killed, including her father. Anka was told of her husband's death shortly after, which allowed her to start a new life away from Nazi rule.
Not wanting to live in communist countries, they emigrated to the UK, settling in Cardiff with Eva's stepfather in 1948.
Anka lived till she was 96 years old, and she and Eva later returned to Mauthausen together. Eva, now living in Cambridge, has 2 sons and 3 grandchildren and has been living in Cambridge ever since. Remarkably, Eva's father-in-law was present at the Dresden raids, the bombing of the city where Anka's armament factory was located.
Despite the events of her life, Eva emphasises the importance of respecting everyone.
While trying to identify with all 6 million Jewish people who were killed during the Holocaust is difficult to comprehend, finding individual stories such as Eva's helps us keep the story of the Holocaust alive and ensures that it will never be forgotten.
And lastly, we want to take a moment to acknowledge the genocides that have occurred after the Holocaust, despite all our promises to never let this happen again.
Since World War II, there have been several genocides, and today we want to focus on 2 that you may not have heard of, the Cambodian genocide and the Rwandan genocide.
Can you start us with what the Cambodian genocide was, Mariam?
The Cambodian genocide took place in the years 1975 to 79 and was caused by the regime of the time, Khmer Rouge, and their leader Pol Pot, who wanted to revert Cambodia into medieval society.
Why would he want to do that? What was his purpose or goal?
Pot had been inspired by the hill tribes of northern Cambodia, who lived spiritual lives without money or man-made goods, and Pot felt like they lived lives that were untainted and pure because of their self-sufficiency.
How did Pot achieve this then, and what was the impact of his decisions to do so?
Pot forced the people of Cambodia to re-enter Middle Ages by announcing that Cambodia will start again at the year 0. This attempt at social engineering had a terrible cost, as whole families and communities died of overwork, disease and starvation.
Also, didn't the Khmer Rouge attack any threats to their regime?
Yes, they were ruthless. They exterminated anyone who they deemed as a threat to the regime, whether that be political enemies, ethnic minorities or even intellectuals. This included killing anyone who they thought was educated, even if they were just wearing glasses.
That's horrific. You said the genocide lasted between 1975 and 1979. 4 years. So how did the genocide end?
The genocide ended after the Vietnamese invaded Cambodia and overthrew the government in January of 1979. After they invaded, the Vietnamese established a new government which allowed for the trials of Pol Pot and other Khmer Rouge officials for the crime of genocide.
This is so vital to learn about because it only happened 30 years after the Holocaust in Germany for similar reasons, the idea of creating a perfect society. However, this is not the only genocide since 1945. In 1994 there was the genocide in Rwanda, correct?
Yes, the genocide in Rwanda started in 1994 and was 100 days long. Between April and July, approximately 800,000 people were murdered and 2 million Rwandans fled the country.
So what were the particulars of the genocide?
In Rwanda, there are 2 prominent ethnic minorities, the majority Hutu and the minority Tutsi. These minorities have had a history of being hostile to one another, and this all came to a head on the 6th of April in 1994, after the Hutu president was murdered when his plane was shot down. The Hutu had blamed an extremist Tutsi group, the RPF, and later that night the organised killing of the Tutsi began.
Did the RPF shoot down the plane then? Was this retaliation or misunderstanding?
That's the thing, nobody knows if they did. But the Hutus saw their chance, and spurred by propaganda and hatred, they used the murder as an excuse to exterminate the Tutsi.
So how did they act during the 100 days?
The genocide was meticulously planned, which tells us that organised ethnic cleansing had always been an aim of the government. Lists were given out to hit groups, who then exterminated whole families and communities of the Tutsi. As well as this, a radio station was set up to coordinate these killings more easily, known as the RLTM.
What brought about the end of this genocide then?
Once again, the ethnic cleansing ended because of international intervention. The UN backed the deployment of French troops to make Rwanda a safe zone once again, effectively shutting down the genocide, repairing the country's economy and creating courts designed to persecute those involved in the genocide at all levels.
So we have covered 2 genocides now, both occurring after the Holocaust and demonstrating the hypocrisies of government when they proclaim never again. This is why it's so important that we acknowledge the discrimination around the world so that we can ensure that this can be prevented and people learn to speak out against hatred in our worldwide society.
Thank you for listening today, and I hope you take away the message that it's always better to be educated on our past than repeat history.
This takes us to the end of our time. Thank you for listening, and we hope that our podcast will inspire you to do your own research and spread knowledge yourselves. It is especially important in our modern world. I'm going to end with a quote from a survivor. It is our responsibility to inspire future generations to stand up against hatred, prejudice and evil.